My name is Frank Bracken. I'm here in the capacity of board member of AGRA. I'm very pleased to moderate this session, expanding the universe of investment-ready agro-business. On the session, there's two parts to it. We have a fantastic lineup of four speakers that will set a bit of scene for a later panel discussion. The topic that we want to address here is, of course, all around building a sustainable and growing agro and food industry. We know that Africa's agribusiness has a potential to grow into a 1 trillion business in the coming 15 years. And yet, I think most of us share a certain frustration that progress is not happening as fast as it should. Two major obstacles are clearly visible in the expansion and investment in the agro sector. One is that we all would like to see a much larger universe of investment-ready companies and projects across the entire food system. And secondly, there's the recurring theme of financing and the lack of innovative financial solution that can really empower agribusiness and deliver on sustainable food systems. So this session will address some of these topics, and as I said, we will do so first by listening to four distinguished speakers. And given the fact that we have started off a little bit later, I want to keep my intro as short as possible. I would like to hand over to the Honorable Mr. Correa. He's the Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development in Mozambique. In previous role, he served as the Minister of Land, Environment and Rural Development in Mozambique. In 2001, he also founded the Incitec Group, one of Mozambique's largest investors conglomerates. He also has been the CEO of the Nacala Development Corridor and the Mozambique Investment Commercial Bank. So a very, very distinguished track record. We do apologize. We have agreed with the minister beforehand that he was free to speak in his mother tongue Portuguese. I believe that there is some technical issues with lining up translations, so apologies for that. With this, I hand over to the Honorable Minister.
Thank you. I was not. I didn't switch on my microphone. So first of all, I would like to say that I am not the Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development. So all the brief you have, Mr. Frank, have done are not regarding to me. It's regarding to my minister, His Honorable Celso Correa, the Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development in Mozambique. My name is Olegario Banza. I am the Vice Minister. What we would like to say is thank you very much for inviting us to this meeting, and say also that our Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development in Mozambique is very committed to expand the universe of investment already in agribusiness by formulating and implementing several measures in order to boost the investment in Mozambique, mostly for our. So within the concept of AGRF theme, growing the continent, feeding the cities, that what type of investment would be achieved, in which vision do we have, what is committed from us. There are some issues that we focus on, mainly to promote the access to finance at affordable interest rates, because the interest rates that are applied for other economic activities may not be so affordable for agriculture. A lot of risks that the agriculture is involved. Other issue that rises very deeply here in Mozambique is agricultural research. You know, without research, you don't have good productivity. You cannot be good in competitiveness in agricultural sector. The other very important issue that here we face in Mozambique, and not only, I think, all over the continent, is how can we remove the barriers to access regional and continental markets. We see that the African continental free trade market is not so implemented. There is some agreements within the continent, within the regions, but there are some concrete measures and concrete activities that must be done in order to improve these facilities. The other issue is about the promotion access to agricultural infrastructures. You know, infrastructures need huge investments. Since the investment markets also is very difficult to access, and then it becomes as a very big difficulty in Africa, in Mozambique, I think in all over all the countries. Another issue very important is about the post-harvest losses that, for example, here in Mozambique, they can reach 30%. We are talking about the losses we faced during the harvesting, during transportation, during conservation. And these losses are very high, mainly in horticultural crops because of lack of conservation and so on. So here, going back to agricultural infrastructures, they are strongly connected with the high logistic costs. You know, without good roads, without good bridges, without good communication and so on, it's a very, very, very difficult to lower the agricultural cost and get competitive in terms of competing with other countries, both within the country, both to export markets. Going to other perspective of this exposition, here in Mozambique, we are doing somehow according to our possibilities, financial possibilities. We're expanding access to export to finance for our smallholder farmers. So we are doing also some huge job in rehabilitation and construction of rural infrastructures. And we are also boosting farmers in terms of make them accessible credit lines in order to make them resilient to climate consideration in terms of climate stressors. All these efforts come in the time when we are facing the COVID-19 pandemic, and we are confronted with very big problems. So this makes us rethink our model of doing the things, where we have to build new sustainable production and consumption system, our balance sheets in terms of what do we produce in our country and what do we need to feed our country in terms of food, and also in terms of food reserve strategy. COVID shows us that if we don't build a very good food reserve strategy, if we rely on imports to feed our people, our future is strongly compromised. So there is some questions on how to advise our small and medium enterprises, preparing them to raise capital. What we see here in Mozambique is that one small agribusiness farm cannot be sustainable alone, standby. So what we have to do is to make them be aggregated along the value chains, along the agribusiness system in Mozambique. We have to make them have good access to market information. And as a government, we have to establish credit lines which may help farmers without collateral to get loans from commercial banks. That's one of the most important. In this exercise, the government may be a partner, may do something in order to ensure warranties to the credits that small farms can get from the commercial banks. This may require strong involvement in all of all agricultural stakeholders and the evidence policy-based guidelines. You see, because if the government tries to act alone, it cannot be successful. So the involvement of small farmers, the involvement of medium processors, aggregators, along all the players of the value chain, this can help overcome all the difficulties that agriculture is facing. So our outlook for 2021, here in Mozambique, we are developing a plan of overcoming the problems of pandemics. You know, our country have been hit last year, 2019, by two very huge cyclones. I'm talking about Idai and Kenneth. And this make our country very weak in terms of sustainability to face COVID challenges. And what we are doing now, we have drawn a program 2020 until 2024. And this program, we call it Sustenta. And we will draw Sustenta. Our challenge is to continue promoting the development of sustainable agriculture with an emphasis on promoting rural farmers and strengthening the private sectors. That the objective or the aim is to expand financial services. You know, our country in 2016, we had our 154 districts, only 85 had bank branches in their villages. So from 2016 until now, we had been able to build from 85 until 139 banks. So only 14 villages remains without a branch bank. So we think that this investment is very good to make all the villages with at least one branch bank. So another thing under this program, we have another issue what we are addressing very carefully is that until now, in all over the country, we have some 2,000 extensionists. So what we are trying to do is to hire even this year another 2,000 extensionists to cover all over the country, so that the ratio of an extensionist for smallholder farmers can double. And then our institute for research in agriculture have been challenged to release some 6 new varieties of cereals. I mean maize and rice, and we think that these varieties are showing very good productivity, and we think that by 2001 and 2021, 2022, these varieties will be expanded all over the country, and we can bring very good productivity in terms of cereals. We are also challenged in establishing of a robust monitoring and evaluation system. You know, this is parallelly we are doing that with registrations of all smallholder farmers we have in our country in order to bring them in commercial value chain so that they can not be left in informal agricultural sector, but they have to be in the formal economic sector that they have to be brought to the value chain so that they can make a sustainable business. So these are the first topics that I would like to share with this audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Banza, Honorable Vice Minister of Agriculture, and apologies for the wrong introduction. My briefing notes had not yet been adopted. This was quite insightful. I'm not going to repeat the points.
Mr. Frank. Mr. Frank.
Yes. Yes.
I am sorry for the big English, but I am still learning.
No, I thought your English was absolutely perfect. I didn't miss anything because of the language. So thank you very much. Excellent. With that, in the context of our time constraint, I would like to move on to the next speaker, Honorable Claire Akamanzi, CEO of the Rwanda Development Board. She has also a very distinguished track record. She's currently a member of the cabinet of Rwanda. She is an international trade and investor lawyer. Previous role includes head of strategy and policy for His Excellency President Kagame. And for over 7 years, she was the chief operating officer of the Rwanda Development Bank. She has also served in diplomatic posts in London and at the World Trade Organization. And with that introduction, I would like to hand over to Mrs. Akamanzi.
Thank you very much, Frank. And I confirm that was the correct introduction. I'm very pleased to join you this morning. And a very many thanks to Vice Minister from Mozambique, Mr. Banze, as well, for his very insightful points from Mozambique. Now, I'd like to share Rwanda's experience in enabling investment in agriculture. But before that, let me just say that agriculture is an extremely important sector, not just for Rwanda, but for the entire continent. And it's important in our economy today, but also for the future. We see that we cannot talk about transforming our economies and economic development without looking at developing and transforming agriculture as well. And so for the Rwanda Development Board that I lead, if we're talking about economic development and investment promotion, agriculture is a very top priority for us as a country and organization. We all know that Africa has one of the largest arable land at about 60% globally. Yet we still have challenges of malnutrition and food insecurity. And while about 50% of the world that is not yet cultivated, the land that is not yet cultivated comes from Africa, we see that not just as a challenge, but also as a great opportunity to be able to cultivate the land that we have in abundance on the African continent, but also to address some of the challenges that we are struggling with as a continent, whether it's malnutrition or food insecurity. Yet we know that a lot of progress has been made across many countries to make agriculture productive and to also commercialize agriculture. We still see some challenges that require improvement in order to be able to supply more sustainable food systems. First of all, we know that there's still a high percentage of farmers that are using traditional methods of cultivation. So modernizing agriculture is very important. We also see that there is a high percentage of waste that our farmers undertake because of inefficiencies in production. We see poor post-harvest handling, and I think the Minister from Mozambique did touch on that as well. And of course, the whole challenge around logistics, storage, cold chain, among others. These are challenges, but also very important opportunities for investors to look at addressing. We know that our business people on the continent solve problems, and addressing these challenges not only solve problems, but also really present viable economic and business opportunities for our people. And of course, for our youth. We have a very young continent. Our demographics show that a very big part of our population are the youth, who we need to provide jobs by making these opportunities productive and to facilitate these opportunities to be able to become viable. Now, I know that many countries on the African continent are addressing these issues in many different ways. We know that for agriculture to become sustainable, we will need to continue attracting the private sector to be able to address these challenges and to participate in the agriculture. Now, the role of government in ensuring that the private sector is playing its part cannot be overemphasized, whether it's a role of government in enabling the private sector with a conducive environment, or whether it's providing the infrastructure required. And again, my colleague from Mozambique did touch on that as well, or just making sure that they're very deliberate, specific programs that are targeting consumption and facilitation of agriculture. Now, let me move on to share with you as I conclude my remarks on what Rwanda has been doing to facilitate investments in agriculture. I have 5 quick points that I want to share. One is creating a conducive business environment. Creating policies that support agriculture has been a very important part for us as a country. First of all, if we're talking about investing in agriculture, we're talking about businesses. What Rwanda has done is to create a conducive business environment where you can register a business within 6 hours and quickly through an automated procedure so that you can have and go to do your business as quickly as possible. This is why Rwanda is ranked the second most easiest place to do business on the African continent after Mauritius. But it's not just reforms in businesses, also land reforms. If you really want to support agriculture, tackling the issue of land reforms is very important. Rwanda is one country on the continent that has been able to title and register all land. Every piece of land in Rwanda is registered and titled. And because of this, farmers can use this land to go to the bank and use it as collateral. And this can give predictability of the most important resource in agriculture, which is land. So policy and business environment is the one segment that the government of Rwanda has really focused on. The second one is infrastructure. Building infrastructure that supports agriculture right from the farm up to consumption. What Rwanda has done is to develop an East African commodities exchange, giving a marketplace in form of this exchange for trading to happen of commodities in agriculture. And so this has been operational for a number of years and supporting farmers to go to market. The second one is irrigation. Rwanda has more than doubled its size of irrigation from about 20,000 to 50,000 today. And we have specific projects that we are preparing with irrigation to attract private investments. Gabiro irrigation project is one example of 15,000 hectares, where we are currently working with a company from Israel called Netafim and preparing irrigated land in order to attract investment. And of course, we've invested also in cold room facilities to support exports of horticulture. And very important also, we invested in our national airline, Rwandair. This is very important for agriculture because having a national airline such as Rwandair has enabled us to give affordable rates of cargo, especially for flowers and horticulture. So these types of infrastructure have been very crucial in supporting agriculture investments in Rwanda, and we continue to do that. The third one is really building institutional support as well as access to financing, building institutions that can make this possible. The Rwanda Development Board that I lead works very closely with the Development Bank of Rwanda, as well as the Business Development Fund that we put in place. These institutions work together to support businesses, especially in agriculture, SMEs in agriculture, to become ready or to become competitive when they go to apply for financing. We advise them on business plan, we advise them on market analysis, we advise them on making their businesses attractive so that a banker or a financial institution can look at it and find it viable. But it's not just that. The Business Development Fund actually also gives guarantees of up to 75% of collateral. So if you want to borrow from any financial institution in Rwanda and you present your competitive project to the Business Development Fund, they will give up to 75% guarantee to any financial institution, which means that the financial institution will need you to take the risk of up to 25%. Again, this is really to make access to financing possible. And lastly, fourth, I want to talk about research and development. Building skills that are viable and building a next generation of leaders in agriculture is very important. We want to commercialize, we want to modernize agriculture. What the government of Rwanda has done is to partner with a philanthropic organization, the Howard Buffett Foundation, and build the Rwanda Institute of Conservation Agriculture, which is a top high-end agriculture school that teaches skills in agriculture to make sure that we are building a modern and skillful agriculture for the future. Lastly is we also implement targeted programs that allow consumption or demand for agriculture to reach its final destination. We have a company and a program called one cup of milk per child, where we are addressing malnutrition by targeting that every child in Rwanda drinks 1 cup of milk. We have public-private partnerships that we put in place with companies such as the Africa Improved Food in order to give fortified food to Rwanda. These are targeted programs that give opportunity and demand for agricultural produce and also processing. And so with these 5 points, Frank, I wanted to share examples of what Rwanda is doing to make sure that we are facilitating and supporting investments in agriculture. Obviously, there's still a long way to go, but we believe strengthening these kind of examples of what we're doing is really going to be supporting the future of agriculture, which is a modern agriculture. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you very much. And I think I'm not the only one who finds a lot of inspiration in the Rwanda example. I have personal roots in Rwanda, so I might not be completely objective, but still I think the facts are there. Rwanda has made has shown tremendous examples of progress. With that, I would like to go on to our next speaker, board colleague of mine in Agra, Mrs. Lina Moholo. She is the Chancellor of the University of Botswana, former Chairman and Governor of the Bank of Botswana. So she is a very, very established banker and can talk to anything related to finance. She served as the Governor of the Bank, Botswana Bank, from 1990 to 2016. She is also a member of the Africa Progress Panel, which is a group of 10 distinguished individuals who advocate at the highest level for equitable and sustainable development in Africa. So all in all, a very, very distinguished leader on the African continent. And with that, I hand over to Lina.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, everyone. Like the previous speakers, I will start on the affirmative that indeed we need to expand the universe of investment-ready agribusinesses globally, but of course we are confined to Africa now, if not to sub-Saharan Africa, which has great potential for the growth of the agribusiness sector that is as yet almost untapped. Many, if not all, countries of the sub-region sit on the cusps of incredible opportunities flowing from the agribusiness sector. This means that with population growth, urbanization, and increasing food demand worldwide, the agribusiness sector has tremendous potential to grow by leaps and bounds. All that is needed is concerted mobilization in an inclusive and sustainable manner so that agribusiness can be a driver of economic transformation, in this way combating poverty, enhancing food and nutrition security, and providing jobs and income to millions of households in sub-Saharan Africa. There is no doubt that the ongoing migration exodus to Europe, particularly by African youth in search of improved livelihoods, would be a thing of the past if we concentrated on expanding the universe of agribusinesses in the continent. What is needed, of course, is an enabling growth positive environment, which requires a much larger universe of investment-ready companies and projects across the entire food system. To advance this cause, there has to be innovative financial solutions, as had already been mentioned, that empower agribusinesses and that deliver sustainable food systems. These investment-ready companies and projects must be made available and accessible to the traditionally disadvantaged, marginalized, even disenfranchised members of society, such as women, youth, and the disabled. It goes without saying that this cohort needs to have access to land, it needs to have access to property rights and security of tenure. This way, these potentially empowered group would benefit from inclusiveness and would grow into an agribusiness sector in a sustainable way. Let me just add that this cohort should also be provided with robust, effective, and communication systems for ease of outreach, as well as to be able to connect with those that have the know-how to expand agribusiness anywhere else, not just in the continent, but also elsewhere. The sub-region should be able to acquire the expertise of attracting a wide range of investors in the sector who would embark on taking investment to the next growth stage. It has to be a matter of time for the sector to learn and develop the relevant strong attributes of attracting investment, such that ultimately it perfects the art of the game and becomes the preferred destination for further investment from anywhere. It can be investment from within the continent, or it can be investment from elsewhere, from those who are able to expand their own agricultural output. After all, investment is the lifeblood of capitalism. It is the engine of economic growth and development. Investment creates employment and jobs. Investment also creates incomes and wealth. Investment generates government revenues, which in turn funds infrastructure such as schools, healthcare, roads, and other public goods. But where will this investment come from? To realize transformation, what is needed is a new generation of visionary investors on a sustainable basis to unleash further growth. Sub-Saharan Africa has a wide range of firms, companies that are investment ready. They range from large cooperatives to middle-sized family-owned firms. All they need is accessing additional investment to be channeled in the direction of further growth. This arrangement would generate growing demand and ultimately attractive investment returns. Speaking of investment returns, I just want to conclude by just saying that it is advisable to note that making agribusiness sexy is not nearly as important as making it profitable. Serious-minded investors would flock to agribusiness if and when it becomes clear that it can make good money. Thank you very much, Frank.
Thank you very much. And that I'm sure that last point about the need for profitability will come back in the panel discussion. A very important point. Thank you, Lina. With that, we go to our last speaker, Dr. Donald Brown, Associate Vice President of IFAD. Donald has been on program management in the program management department at IFAD. In that capacity, is responsible for developing and managing the operations that IFAD supports through its loans and grants program. In previous capacity, he has been at the United Kingdom's Department for International Development, known as DFID, in a number of senior positions. Lastly, as the Africa Director. So Donald is very familiar with Africa. And with that, I would like to hand over to Dr. Brown.
Thank you, Frank, and thank you for the introduction. And not only am I familiar, but I'm a child of Africa too. Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And I hope I can add maybe a slightly different and complementary perspective to previous speakers. So maybe just quickly, I'll say a little bit about what IFAD is and what we do, just to set the context, and then talk about it from IFAD's perspective, because we actually focus on the poorest, most marginalized in rural areas. So it's a slightly different view of agribusiness and agribusiness investment. So for those of you that don't know IFAD, which is the International Fund for Agricultural Development, I always say we're sort of a hybrid of a specialized UN financing institution and an international financing institution such as the World Bank. We focus on rural and agricultural transformation, and our target group is the poorest and most marginalized. We have a particular focus in Africa, and about 60% of our current investments are in Africa and sub-Saharan Africa. We've been around for a while, since 1977. we're operating in about 92 countries, as Frank says, through loans, grants, and technical assistance. And the current portfolio size is about 18 billion. So in terms of our work with agribusiness and trying to promote that aspect of it, and particularly in terms of a pro-poor investment, we take particularly a value chain approach as we invest. So we look right through the system, through production, through to marketing, through processing, and sort of key to this is what we call the 4 Ps approach. I'm sure you all know about public-private partnerships. Well, for us, there's an extra P in there. It's called producers. So it's public-private producer partnerships, and particularly working with farmer cooperatives, farmer organizations, and the more marginalized. So we focus on the bottom end of the pyramid. How do you take these sorts of producers, these sorts of agribusinesses, how do you grow them, and how do you make them investment ready? So it's about inclusive growth for us. We have a number of ways. We have our direct portfolio of projects. We have recently in 2019 set up the ABC Fund, which I've spoken about at previous AGRFs. And I'm pleased to say we've got 7 investments now in Sub-Saharan Africa, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, and Burkina Faso. We've recently set up a private sector facility as well, with an initial investment from EFAB funding of 25 million, which we're working on. So that said, and I'd like to take a little bit of a step back here and say, and looking at the universal investment ready agribusinesses, and maybe just put a slightly alternative, maybe controversial view in here. So, you know, it's frequently said that the reason agricultural investment gap in Africa is not a lack of money, but a lack of, of investable or bankable projects, particularly on the agri-SME side. Yet, from our work, we see many successful small-scale entrepreneurs in Africa with good businesses, but who are struggling to access the type of capital they need to grow those businesses. So let's focus on that type of capital as well. You know, I don't believe it's just about the business. It's about what is the money that's there and how can we use it to make them maybe much more attractive to bigger investments, to increase that scale. And obviously that's increasingly more difficult under COVID. So for me and from our experience in EFAD, this suggests that the investment gap has roots both on the finance side, but also on the sort of business side. And it's not, it's not just on the investments. So the concept of bankable or investable companies and projects means very different things to different people. And I just want to make sure that perspective's there and the development perspective's there. And the reality is that expanding the universe of what is bankable or investable is also about making sure that the financial offerings come from a variety of types of investors and financiers, and recognizing that different types of investors have different appetites and tolerance of risk, investment sizes, products, etc. So a commercial bank and an impact lender will not find the same company investable in. So we've got to expand the investor pie and the products alongside the investment pie. And the latter cannot really happen without the formula. Indeed, some investors, incubator funds, accelerator funds, angel capital providers, specializing in providing the type of capital that helps companies grow to become investable. And this is the type of investor, in our view, that's often most limited in supply of agriculture in Africa. That said, there are a number of elements that are likely to have impact across all investment categories. And that's about improving the business environment and reducing the risks. And I think some of our other speakers have talked a bit about that. So I'm not going to, I'm not going to go on about infrastructure or business environment. But there is a role for public investment in here too. And I think we heard that from a number of the speakers. And that's what EFAD also does. Public investment, while private investment has its role to play, can also level up the playing field, can bring in some of these smaller, more marginalized groups into this side of things. So I just want to finish, just think a little bit about one of the questions, which is, how can traditionally disadvantaged groups such as women, youth, and the rural poor become investment ready? So from our experience, you have to have a really, really good targeting strategy. You've got to know who they are. You've got to understand the constraints to them being able to participate properly in agribusiness. And then you need specific tailored interventions that help. So just summing that up. So everyone needs some technical support, technical assistance, but we need very, very tailored technical assistance to those sorts of disadvantaged groups, you know, around the sort of technologies, the appropriate technologies, but also the skills they need. You know, it's often as basic as financial literacy, but you know, these are real entrepreneurs, and what we find is you give them a break and they really take it. Secondly, you need particular business and financial advice, and you need to invest in that capacity side of things. And then just lastly, and as I've talked about, you need that access to the sorts of capital they need to start up and grow their businesses, including initially that may be some grants, that may be some loans, that may be some specific free technical advice. And so incubator and challenge funds are often really, really helpful, as are some of those grants. So I hope with that, Frank, we've maybe enlivened the debate a bit more, and I will close there. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Donald. Very, very interesting. And I'm sure these points will come back in the panel discussion. So I think we had an excellent scene setting from our 4 speakers, who I would like to thank again for their opening remarks and insights that will now also feed into the panel discussion, for which we have lined up another group of people. I will bail out here as the moderator and hand over to Jennifer, one of my AGRA colleagues. Jennifer, with this, I hand over to you.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you very much, Frank, and thank you very much to the distinguished panel. Really helped to initially set the scene, highlight some critical topics as well that we can basically take on into our second panel. My name is Jennifer Baren. I'm the head of partnership for AGRA, and together with over 20 partners this week have been facilitating the agribusiness deal room, where over 3,000 participants are exploring almost $4 billion in both public and private investments. So it's really also of personal interest to me to answer the key questions that we will be addressing in our second panel, in terms of how do we actually then make all of these investment opportunities investment ready? How do we land the transactions? But also critically, how do we make sure that it has impact and that it's inclusive, that it addresses sustainability measures as well, and helps to build food security in the context of our growing cities and the rapid urbanization and changing social demographics in Africa. And luckily, I'm not the only one who will be answering this question here today. We have a great panel of practitioners, of investors, of transaction advisors, who will all, in the context and the settings of what our earlier speakers have said, will be addressing this question. So there were a couple of things that came out of the first discussion in terms of risk, in terms of the gap between supply and demand, in terms of the role that government can play. The way how we will run the second part is that I will give each speaker an opportunity to just introduce themselves, introduce their institution, and really highlight the role that they play in creating more investment-ready businesses, but also to bridge the gap between the supply of opportunities and the gap in terms of the capital available. Secondly, what we will do, we will have a bit of an interactive discussion. And thirdly, we will give you as participants an opportunity to also engage. So please, if you have any particular questions, comments, remarks, make them in the comment section, and we will come back to you. So without further ado, I would like to switch to my panel. I would like to invite Victoria Sabula from AGRF. Please introduce yourself, your organization, and help us to answer the question in terms of what it is that AGRF is actually doing in this space. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It is a great pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to the discussions. It's been wonderful to listen to the other panelists that have come before, and they have provided great insights just around how we can be able to support the agribusiness sector. So I'll tell you a little bit about ACF and what we do to support businesses in the Sub-Sahara. So the ACF is a private sector focused challenge fund, and Donald Brown just talked about the importance of challenge funds and accelerators. So we are a challenge fund that supports innovative commercial businesses in the agribusiness and renewable energy sectors with capital and advisory support, with the aim of reducing poverty, promoting resilient communities, and creating jobs through private sector development. Our founding purpose really was to make market systems work for the poor in the sub-Sahara Africa. And from the beginning, ACF was set out to achieve its goals by investing in innovative businesses, initiatives, and projects that have the potential to change how value chains work, but struggle to access capital because of the risk appetite of commercial funders. We have since invested in about 292 businesses in the Sub-Sahara across 26 countries, specifically early stage and growth stage businesses, and are on course to onboard 200 more over the next year. With this number of businesses, it tells you that you can bet on early stage companies that really just want to be trusted that they can do something great with the ideas and the innovations that they have. And beyond providing patient capital, we offer investments advisory services through ACF Connect. And ACF Connect was designed to help enterprises to raise commercial capital in greater volumes more efficiently through support on investor-investee matchmaking, like what has been happening at the deal room this week, and expert advisory on deal preparation and negotiation, because it is very technical. And oftentimes you find entrepreneurs that are naive and unprepared, and they just need that professional expertise to help them to meet the demands of their investors. We have so far helped 12 companies out of our portfolio to raise, Series A capital in 18 transactions. And as we have done this work, we have seen significant growth in available capital for impact investing. But investors still struggle to connect to investable enterprises in the Sub-Sahara. And this really is attributable to three main reasons. There is still a very big gap between the commercial capital available for mid and lower end businesses, and really because the mature businesses have a lot of capital to access, the small and medium enterprises have very limited investors that are willing to work with them. And of course, the small medium enterprises also are still ill-equipped, as we know, and hence this session to access the capital available. But also, really, business development service providers face an attractive economics in serving lower end businesses. Think about it, that today in the Sub-Sahara, the transaction costs are 24 to 26% of a deal. And that is why investors would rather do the big ticket sizes, because it just makes economic sense. So there is need for some of us partners who are here today to de-risk that part, take on the transaction costs and do the work that's necessary to prepare the businesses. I have often heard businesses and entrepreneurs say, I was investor ready from day one. But what they really mean is they were ready to accept money. Often they do not have the plans, they don't have the processes, they don't have the people in place to grow and expand the business. And so they might be ready to accept finance to continue business as usual, but that is not really what an investor is looking for. An investor is looking for growth, they're looking for scale, acceleration, they're looking for high impact results, and they just want to see the certainty of returns. So then how do we bridge this gap between the needs of the investors and the demands of the investors and the needs of the entrepreneur? We feel very strongly at ACF that we must invest in identifying the gaps between what the investor needs and where the business is at, and then start addressing this with the entrepreneur so that they have the clarity on their business cycle, how much they are looking to raise, what is the type of funding, and what is the purpose of the funding, because not all forms of instruments and funds available could be fit for purpose for their business. How strong is the team to execute on the growth plans? Because the entrepreneur, the investor will bet on the team that you have, not just the vision that you're able to sell as an entrepreneur. And then also what is the evidence of the sound and compelling metrics to support their growth story? So we really believe that in helping the entrepreneur to be able to package their story in a way that actually speaks to the sophisticated investor. So we have seen that companies, if financed properly and combined with tailor-made technical assistance, can be made ready for the demands of the investors beyond concessional finance. And we can grow the pool of companies that are attractive to investors as well as communities and markets they serve. And I just call on us who have been here at AGRF having these discussions, let's think of an investor-ready fund so that we invest on getting more businesses ready so that investors don't have to shy away on the issue of transaction costs relating to small and medium enterprises in the sub-Sahara. Those would be my remarks, Jennifer, and I look forward to further interactions as we discuss in this panel.
Fantastic, Victoria. Thank you for your contribution, and actually quite impressive outcomes on the work that AGRF has been doing, 300 companies. And you're really calling for let's establish an investment-ready fund. Would you say that in the whole landscape that we currently have, there isn't sufficient funding or at least a structure available to actually bridge that gap, so that there is need for another design or a structure that will support companies to become even more investment ready?
I find that there is not enough outfits or funds that are just focused specifically on actually getting the business ready, because it is an art of patience. It takes time. We have seen that actually by the time you're really confident that a company is out of the woods, it is the 7th and the 10th year. Who is going to sit there and wait for a company to be ready for investors at the 7th year? So which means that it has to be a separate person, because an investor wants to see their returns very quickly because they just don't want their money sitting around. So we need a mix of the experts who are able to actually, position the businesses to receive capital and walk the journey. And then secondly, a broader pool of patient capital providers. There is not many AECFs, for example, in the continent today that are willing to provide grants to private sector. There are even people who today still question why private sector businesses would be recipients of grant money and repayable grants. Yet that is necessary for them to be bootstrapped to come off the ground and therefore be able to then be ready to have conversations with a commercial investor whose focus is just financial return. And yet, as we wait for the commercial investor to be willing to do that, there is development challenges we need to resolve. So in the meantime, there is work that needs to be going, hence the need for the AECF and other risk capital providers to step up and be intentional on the type of fund and the type of design of products that are offered to small and lower end businesses.
Thank you very much for that, Victoria. I think very clear in terms of what the needs are and how the gap can be bridged. In terms of the next speaker, I would like to go to Adrian van der Knaap of FTMA, because part of ensuring that we have investment-ready businesses, as mentioned beforehand, is also to ensure that they impact and engage with our farmers, engage with vulnerable groups, and also look into aspects such as sustainability and food security, etc. So Adrian, we would really like to hear from you what it is that the Farm to Market Alliance is doing in this context. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Jennifer. That is quite a lot you ask here. First of all, Farm to Market Alliance is a public-private partnership with, on the public side, members World Food Programme and AGRA, and on the private sector side, Bayer, Rabobank, IARA, and Syngenta. So we want to make markets work better for farmers, and we have boots on the ground. But Jennifer, if I may, I just want to mention a few major points that I would like to throw out, and maybe that can be helpful for the discussion later. Because we want to be more inclusive with women, youth, people with certain less abilities. We want to be profitable in agriculture. We want to be environmentally sound. It has to be sustainable. It has to be more nutritional value, etc., etc. If we all want this, and I think we should want it and we should pursue it, I think we need to stop doing what we are doing. We don't necessarily need more money. We don't necessarily need more land, which I hear also. We don't necessarily need more subsidies. We don't necessarily need more food reserves. So let's think, do we need the traditional banks, for example? Do we really need them? Maybe we need investors and fund managers. Maybe we don't need the traditional banks. What I see in Kenya and some other countries where the mobile money platforms has allowed a sort of almost revolution with the fintechs, I see the banks playing a very limited role. Do we really need more land? Is it not already a problem with the climate, with climate change, environmental challenges? Maybe we need less land. Maybe we should think about vertical farming rather than horizontal farming. Do we need more food reserves? Do we need governments to have more food reserves? If we think of, and I think the Vice Minister manages the post-harvest loss, if every farmer and if every agribusiness in a specific country would have safe storage, wouldn't you have then a food reserve that is not necessarily owned by one public or private entity, but by millions of farmers and businesses? And I think some countries, it works like that. A food reserve does not necessarily have to be owned or managed by one entity. Maybe it can be controlled by millions of entities. So I have a few more, I think, but maybe I will stop there. Jennifer, what I wanted to emphasize, if we want to be really more inclusive, more environmentally sound, less profitable, just doing what we always did, but more of it, I mean, more money, more land, more subsidies, etc. I think that's the wrong approach. We need to be smarter. We need to be open for new ideas. Thank you very much.
I like that, Adrian. Thank you very much. We have to have some revolutionary thoughts and basically do things differently, think out of the box. Definitely we'll park that for the discussion later on. I'd like to therefore go to Ashley Lewis. Ashley, perhaps I'm building on what Adrian was saying. Maybe you can share with us some of the work that you're doing in terms of really changing the landscape and trying to bridge the gap between the pipeline of investment opportunities and the capital and the technical assistance that is available. And please
Absolutely.
also introduce yourself and your organization. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me today. So I'm Ashley Lewis. I'm a Senior Investment Officer with Axion Venture Lab. And just to take a step back, because I think I fit into this panel in a different way, I'm part of Axion International, which focuses on financial inclusion globally. And so you might be asking, why is somebody focused on financial inclusion on this panel talking about agriculture? I'm going to talk about that intersection point a little bit later. But our organization has been around for 60 years. And it started mostly focused on the microfinance side of the industry 8 years ago. We took a step back and we said the future of financial inclusion will be digital. It will be fintech enabled. What can we do to support early stage ventures in achieving our mission of financial inclusion and building products and services with that in mind? And so we launched Axion Venture Lab, which is a seed stage investment vehicle that invests globally in early stage ventures. And over the 8 years, we've now invested in 47 different companies. And so instead of thinking about SMEs, we're actually looking at highly scalable fintech businesses. And we've had an opportunity to invest across a number of models. So utilizing alternative data for credit scoring, lending, insurance. And what we got really excited about and what brings me here today is this intersection between agriculture and fintech. And so over the last few years, we've been doing more investments that are focused on how do we deliver products and services to smallholder farmers, enabling them digitally, but also enabling them with the financial services that they need to live prosperous and healthy lives. And so I'm really excited to share that of our 47 investments, 2 of those are focused on this intersection of agriculture and finance. And we're actually in the process of closing 2 more deals, one in Brazil and one in India, focused on this agriculture connection as well. So we're building up our portfolio of agri-focused businesses as we speak. And so where we're investing is and how we do it is that we're investing up to $500,000 in a seed stage round. So usually that's somewhere between a round of $1 to $3.5 million, depending on the region. And where our model differs is that we have a fully embedded portfolio engagement team that goes on the ground, works with our companies to address major challenges related to scaling. And so we've done this with our agricultural-based businesses. One is focused on providing input loans to smallholder farmers, and it's called Apollo Agriculture, based out of Kenya. And then our second portfolio company is called Pula, which is enabling farmers to access insurance across the African continent through input providers. And so where our portfolio engagement team really steps in is on product design, on customer segmentation, on international expansion. I'm super excited to share that Pula is our only portfolio company in Africa. I actually manage 8 different portfolio companies that has been able to expand internationally. And so a lot of people talk about this international expansion opportunity, the full, billion+ people that we have available to us, but many of these ventures end up hitting a hurdle when they go to expand internationally. And what Pula has proven is that the need for smallholder farmers transcends boundaries, and this is a product that can really be applicable no matter if you're in Mozambique, if you're in Kenya, if you're in Nigeria. Those are just my first thoughts. Where we haven't gotten involved as much is on that pre-pipeline development. And so I spend a lot of time, obviously, on pipeline development and deal execution. However, we haven't provided as much support to organizations that are coming into the pipeline. We have tested out a few models. In Nigeria, we launched a venture building program, which actually took innovators through the process of problem identification, piloting, and launching. One of those businesses that came out of the program was an agriculture-focused business. So we have seen how our support services can help a business there, but really our activities, our principal activities, are our investment activities, which are more so focused on high-scale businesses that are already existing in the market.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this is part of the innovation that we were talking about earlier, and interesting that you closed with some of the gaps that you still experience, in the sense that you haven't really focused on creating that pre-pipeline yet. So I think that really takes us to Paul Olmaf, principal at Cross Boundary, who has been a core implementing partner of some of the activities as well here this week in the deal room. Paul, an opportunity to introduce yourself and also just share with us what it is that you're doing at Cross Boundary in terms of addressing some of these strategic issues. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer, and glad to be on this distinguished panel. And also thank you to AGRF for organizing this and Rwanda for hosting us. As a bit of background, so Cross Boundary is a frontier markets investment firm. And our mission is really to unlock capital and support sustainable growth in underserved markets. In the context of this event, if you think about underserved markets, there'll probably be agriculture, but also the players within the agriculture ecosystem. So women and youth who are obviously struggling to access capital in this ecosystem. Our business has an investment advisory side, which I sit on in Nairobi and cover East Africa. But we've also developed investment management platforms that also invest in sectors that are underserved within the continent. So the renewable sector, but also educational infrastructure. Our services are in kind of 2 buckets that fit into the discussion. So we support buy-side activities. So really supporting private equity firms, development finance institutions, and more recently, more impact investors and family offices to deploy capital within the markets that we operate in. On the sell side of our activities, it's really helping enterprises like those who are showcased at the deal room to raise capital from this kind of pool of investors. And then also helping investors to exit the portfolio companies at when the time horizon achieves. Based on our work to date, we've supported the raising of about 700 million in closed transactions. And then agriculture continues to be a core focus area of ours, not only with Agra, but also different stakeholders. So even in the midst of what kind of the globe is facing in terms of the pandemic, we've been successful in terms of raising about 30 million in capital within agribusiness, not only in Kenya, but also in West Africa. And we're seeing this in terms of companies engage in the enabling side of activities, in irrigation, in tech. You're also seeing companies, in the processing side of things. So they're not only helping a lot of individuals, smallholder farmers become self-sustainable, but also reducing the kind of supporting the import substitution challenge that a lot of countries are facing. The other thing that kind of Victoria mentioned that I'd just like to highlight, the ability to cover a lot of these services and also thinking about the timeline in terms of how long these transactions can take to close. I'd say from when we start our work until when a successful close can happen could be 9 or 12 months. So that is a significant investment on the part of the advisors, but also the companies. To address that challenge, we've partnered with stakeholders within the ecosystem, like USAID, to develop donor investment facilitation models, which really helps unlock capital in very challenging markets that are underserved. A good example is the work that we've done in partnership with USAID in markets like Mali. Our work really, helps expand the universe of investable enterprises, and I'll use the DROM as an example. We've been working with AGRA and different partners last year, but also this year to scale it. Really identifying a pool of investable enterprises, and when I say investable, asking the critical questions that investors want to know to at least start the conversation. What is your business model? What is your kind of financial position in terms of revenue and profitability? How will you use this capital that you're looking to raise from us? And then, do you have the infrastructure to actually put this capital to work? In terms of management, in terms of expansion plans, and even in management, are you, which is very critical, are you reflecting the broader society that we live in? Is there a good gender mix? Is there a good mix in terms of youth? And we all need to really appreciate that those dynamics need to be taken into account. On the investor side, part of our work is also making sure that we arm the investors with the right tools in order to assess some of these transactions. So putting together the relevant materials that they can review, and then use the deal room as a beginning of a conversation, and then kind of help them walk through the broader.
Yes, I think we just launched it out for a few seconds, Paul. But thank you for that concluding remark, and actually also indicating how a lot of the work that you do is complementary to some of the gaps that some of our earlier speakers had identified. I think this was really a very interesting round of introduction, and I would like to take it back to my co-moderator slash panelist, Frank. There is already a lot happening. And I really liked also how Donald framed some of the challenges in terms of the supply and the gap. I think the question remains, and I'll start with you, Frank, in a sense like, what should we really prioritize in terms of addressing that gap? And also specifically, I think in the context of COVID, everybody always says that, or the cliche saying is that never make a good crisis go to waste in terms of the opportunity to really transform. Coming back to some of the comments also that Adrian made, from your perspective, Frank, where are really the priorities in terms of bridging this gap, and who specifically can do what?
Yeah. I've of course, as you know, many perspectives, but the multinational perspective I spent a great part of my life, the not-for-profit from my AGRA engagement, and now currently as a partner in a private equity firm. So I've different hats and different perspectives, which I find extremely helpful and which has actually moved on my thinking about the topic. I am increasingly aware that the number one challenge that we are all facing, after my personal involvement of over 10 years on this topic, as you know, Jennifer, because we together were there when the SAFCOT in Tanzania project started 10 years ago. I'm increasingly aware that the number one challenge that we are facing is lack of successes. Now, it's always, every business knows that it's actually easier to sell an idea and a concept than a business that already exists for some time, because then you need to have a track record. And what we collectively need to be aware of, that the number one thing that can really move the needle on expanding the universe of investment-ready businesses is making really creating a higher level of successes. Private equity returns in Africa have been extremely disappointing. I mean, there's hush-hush, there's not a lot of talk about it, but that's the reality. The return on capital has been abysmal, less than 7%, 5%, 6%. Now, this in the context where debt, governments borrow money at 12, 14, 15%. So private investors have been walking home with 4 to 5%. I don't have specific figures for the agro sector, but I wouldn't be surprised if that is even less than that. So now, what should we do about this? I mean, we have to have different conversations with the capital providers, and particularly the impact investors, the DFIs, who are, I think, very schizophrenic. They have a cost of capital of less than 2% because they borrow through their governments, and yet you will see them deployed in many cases also for 12, 13, 14, 15%. Now, is that right? That's a conversation that needs to be had, I believe. We need to have a conversation with the investors or the providers of capital like AGRF, where I'm on the board. And that is the fragmented deployment of grants, is that actually enhancing the possibility of success, or does it sustain fragmentation? Because one of the things that we as institutions and investors should do is pooling effort. A couple of companies in the current platform were really almost in a partnership idea where AGRA, AGRF, the impact investors, private investors, almost in a pooled effort, are going to create success stories. And not everybody doing his own thing in isolation, because that doesn't seem to work very much. That I think, look, the flower industry in Kenya, it's not there and successful because of AGRA or because of Unilever or because of a couple of individual investors. It's there because it was successful. It was financially successful. The early starters became bigger, people copy, it scales up, etc. So how can we create that kind of repeatability? I was struck by a couple of things that was said. For example, when Victoria says transaction costs of 24, I think Victoria said 24%. All of that, of course, that all feeds through in this low return for investors. So governments must be increasingly held to account as well in terms of what can they do to drive transaction costs down, what is possible, so that smaller investors can really have a more meaningful return. One last point, I was struck by what Adrian threw a lot of questions at us, but I think we also have to start recognizing that choices have to be made. 10 years ago and in the last years, we have been extremely greedy in the sense that we want to look after the smallholder farmer, gender diversity, the climate, and we want investors to also have a return. Now, is there something that needs to be prioritized here? For example, a topic that I always find sitting uneasy in these discussions is, should we accept that scale actually matters, that there is an important role to play for large-scale commercial farming, that without it, you will not have small-scale commercial farming left? Question, right? Does scale matters in all of this? And should we actually actively encourage scaling up, something that doesn't sit well with many people, because small is beautiful in our mind? So maybe we should start having these difficult conversations that also Adrian was referring to. So that's all what I want to say at this stage.
Thank you very much for that, Frank. Some more challenging questions, and I would like to take some of these actually back to our panel. Looking more specifically at Ashley and Paul in your role of working directly with SMEs and companies, etc. If you listen to what Frank just highlighted, in a sense, like how do we address some of these risks? How do we address the fragmentation? And specifically talk to us about what are the type of new partnerships that it is that we probably need to build in order to address some of these challenges? Any reflections from your end? And then I'm coming to you, Victoria. Please go ahead. Ashley, perhaps first, and then Paul.
Yes, happy to take that one. So I actually want to touch on something that Frank mentioned about small being beautiful in this market, right? And so because as a venture capitalist, we often are talking about scale. However, we do also see the beauty in being small, and scale does not necessarily have to mean scaling at the farming systems. It can mean finding solutions that address what small producers are actually facing. And so in our seat, we're doing that through enabling financial services and realizing that for many farmers, they will stay in a much smaller state and not necessarily trying to consolidate things to the point where you have mass farming. However, there is still an opportunity there to create value, to have exits, to and to have like a venture capital story as well. When it comes to partnerships, so this one's an interesting one, especially when for us when we are entering into different sectors. So we do a lot of cross-sectoral investment in agriculture, but also in healthcare. And we find ourselves kind of being that financial inclusion champion, but we have to partner with other organizations and other funds to complement and help grow our businesses from very different angles. And so we see, and this is why we only co-invest with other investors, both locally and internationally, to ensure that we have the right boards, that we have the right advisory services, and that we have the right extension as far as networks across the investor consortium to help those businesses grow. And that's why I've seen a lot of success in the diversity of the investors that we bring to the board, or bring to the deal, I should say. That's one of the ways that I would tackle the partnership and alliance question. I'm not sure,
Thank
Paul.
Thank you very much. Yes, Paul, over to you. Yep. Partnerships, and Frank also mentioned something very interesting in terms of building some of these partnerships and new alliances. Can we also have difficult discussions about how capital is structured with capital providers as well? Paul, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks, Frank, for that question. I think one thing that comes across to us also is that, you know, based on the different kind of enterprise that you see in the ecosystem, it has to be tailored with the types of capital out there. So if we look at the deal room that we worked on, you know, you have ticket sizes ranging from 50,000 to as high as 150 million. So for those smaller ticket items, you know, the ones that are, you know, much more early stage, we have a pool of capital that's available to them. And as those opportunities scale up, you know, and to your point, Frank, about consolidation, about kind of larger scale commercial farms, they can feed into these larger capital providers. So I do think there's space for each ecosystem player to get involved. But I think also one critical thing that we need to also be aware of is that, and this also feeds to Victoria's earlier point, is that some of these businesses require quite a bit of handholding to get to that scale. So we should have a discussion with the capital providers about how the model of their, you know, fund economics is actually working. Are they able to allocate enough, you know, budget, enough capital towards value addition of their portfolio companies? A lot of companies are asking for this. You know, it's not, you know, maybe 5 years ago, it was all about, if you give me capital, you know, that's the deal. But then it's a two-way street now. If you want that 25% IRR, you know, what are you going to offer me in return? Are you going to help me in terms of building my internal infrastructure? Is it going to be a shared vision? If you benefit from this capital raise in terms of your returns in 5 years, I should too. So I think that's a critical discussion that we should be having. In terms of transaction costs, you know, definitely agree. You know, there's some segments of this ecosystem that, you know, cannot afford these services. But we also want to ensure that we're putting it on a path to kind of self-reliance. And what do I mean by that? You know, if an enterprise knows that they're going to be getting services from advisory firm X, and, you know, we're really focused on helping them scale, but there's no cost implication to them, how do we ensure that, kind of embed, some form of, let's say repayable grant, so they have skin in the game. So, hand in hand, we're making sure that we're holding them accountable. And then maybe just second point to that is how we also transferring this knowledge onto them. In 9 months, if they're going through another capital raise, we want to make sure that the management team on their side can actually use the relevant tools to start engaging with investors in the ecosystem. And one thing that obviously AGRA has done, USAID, German Development Corporation, and also IFC has put together a resource bank for the deal room where enterprises can tap into this and use on a year-round basis to make sure that they have the necessary tools to support them going forward.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that answer, Paul. Victoria, I would like to come back to you specifically on the question of fragmentation. And I think you also alluded to it earlier with your call for more funding and capital. Would you like to reflect on that statement that Frank made earlier?
Thank you, Jennifer. What I don't know whether really, and I don't want to sound pessimistic, I do not find that we will get to a place where we will not deal with the fragmentation issue, because a lot of times people come into the play area with very set demands. They come with very set aspirations. They come with very set regulations. And so what you then find is that even though you would want to be able to work well together, it actually requires a trade-off. So the thing would be actually to get to know what is it that the commercial investor is willing to give up on, but what is a learning also that the patient capital provider is willing to do in order for all of us to play and not just have all of this fragmentation that is going on in the ecosystem. There is also the issue of competition, where as in everybody tends to think that, no, but I don't play in your arena, so why don't we partner? But yet when I go back and think about my strategies, I expand my competitors list. I think that, no. But AGRA, even though they are just in agri, they still have financial inclusion. They still focus on SMEs. I think I should have my own strategy because I need to be ahead of AGRA. Or, the private equity investor will actually think that you guys have actually distorted the market, and for that particular reason there is no need for me to speak with you because I don't really agree with your ideals. So I just think that we must be able to understand that there will always be the fragmentation. But for those of us who are here today, how do we reach out to each other and start seeing the connect? Let's work from the areas where we align. We agree that we need investor-ready businesses. We agree that this is the shape and form that those businesses actually take. Okay, so why then don't we work on this one particular area that we get to agree on? And then at a point that you need to have a relationship with this business, have the relationship with this business in a way that aligns indeed with your conditionalities and all of that. I have sat in panels with DFIs. And one of the things that we struggle when it comes to DFIs is that they never come off their pedestal. It is just about, this is a risk profile. This is how we invest in the Sub-Sahara. This is the deal sizes that we have to deal with. This is. So at the end of the day, what I think is that from a partnerships perspective, I don't see that we will resolve, I repeat again, the entirety of the fragmentation issue. I just see that we need to identify the small little areas that will give us progress. So we need to think about blended capital, for example. So everybody, that I will be able to bring my patient capital, and then you bring your financial return specific capital. Let's blend it together, and that way every one of us is comfortable with the risk that we have attributed to a particular transaction. So blended finance is also a very good way of dealing with the fragmentation issue because it brings us together.
Thank you for that, Victoria. That is indeed quite interesting. There are a couple of questions coming in through the chat that also are dealing with how do we set up more innovative structures, funding structures, etc. I'll just post some of them to the panel. And really, the issue of blended finance also touches upon the role that often also governments and other type of institutions can play. So in that sense, I would like to request both Donna Brown from IFAD as Mrs. Moholo to just be standby. I will pull you into this discussion as well. So if we can just maybe go to some of the questions that are coming through in the chat. If you just hold on one second, please. One question is really about what are the new innovative ways of developing African agri-capital marketplaces, right? And there are also some suggestions in terms of, for example, the emerging growth of green bonds and funds that are being issued. I think I'll direct that question to Frank. In that sense, what are some of the innovative models that you see emerging that could be beneficial in addition to blended finance? And I'd also like to address this to Donald, because you definitely clearly spoke also about the gap in terms of the access to finance and how appropriate is that finance actually for the pipeline that has been developed. Frank, over to you first.
Few innovative finance techniques, but that's also because I am not necessarily aware of everything. That's not my area of expertise. But one thing that I have acquired some expertise in is in how much that existing financing approaches are actually leading to somewhat dysfunctional behavior. The traditional private equity model, which comes from Western Europe, actually rewards fund manager. A fund manager says to investor, can I have your millions? And I will invest it in other projects. I'll keep it for 5 years and then I'll give it back to you. I'll get a fee for managing your money. And if I'm really successful, then I get a lot of money from the upside. Okay? The carry, as they call it. Some of you might know that. Now, what happens in the Africa context is that clearly the past has been so challenging that most of these funds, they don't achieve these fantastic returns, so there's no carry. So the manager's only income is the management fee, right? So you have no interest to cancel your fund. You have no interest to actually stop it or get out of it. So it almost by implication becomes patient capital. The investors are getting increasingly unhappy because the fund keeps on keeping their money. The fund says we can't sell, so we sit on it, right? Because they need the 2% of the investment to keep on going. So there's an implicit conflict in there, and that is increasingly visible in the Africa investment space. So what I'm doing with a couple of other people is to see whether we should not recognize that there is a built-in conflict of interest, and that the way that private equity should organize itself should be differently. Namely, you should have a mechanism that encourages exits. So management fees, for example, should stop after a certain period. So you better give the money back, recycle the money, or you lose your management fee. Hurdle rates where you really make some money maybe should recognize the context and should be lower, so that people, if you ask somebody to make 20%, I mean, let's recognize this is going to remain challenging. And last but not least, we talk a lot about impact, and specifically with the DFIs, impact. Is there a way to reward for impact? If we recognize that making 15% is really, really extremely challenging for even the best of fund manager, what about rewarding that fund manager for impact? So I think that in the coming months, years, you will see some changes in that direction and discussions, and I'm very hopeful that will make investment in the agro sector much more feasible and much more possible. One point that I wanted to respond to Victoria on this partnership, I so agree with you, and I always admire you for being blunt and honest. Like people see each other as competitors. You know, we are all doing good, but I'm doing better for the smallholder. I know precisely what you mean. But what I was thinking about is a sort of a construct where I, as a private equity investor, a really hardcore, let's say I'm the private equity investor, can I have a sort of an understanding with an organization like AGRF that you are upfront in the project pipeline? So please keep me informed and talk to me about everything you do in the granting space. Because the understanding is that at this phase one, you're prepping it up for me. You're prepping it for the future. You're preparing it, right? We talk about it years in advance. Then in part of that consortium is also the impact investors. Like, can you live with a lower, can you help the project with a lower expectation in return, but a high delivery on impact? Can you be part of this consortium? So more of a very specific project-focused conversation between people who have a different perspective on a project. You can give grants, you make it ready. Private investor needs 14, 15% return. Impact investors, hopefully in the future, will take a lower financial return in return for impact. So that is what I was thinking about in terms of potential future partnership. Maybe it's more partnership thinking than partnerships in a formal sense. Jennifer?
Thank you for that contribution, Frank. And I'm looking at Paul and Ashley, whether I can find nods of approval for some of these measures that Frank is proposing in terms of getting rid of the hurdle rates, canceling management fees at one point in time. If there are any other additional innovative measures that you might see, very briefly, because I would like to go to some of the other speakers to get some of their remarks as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say canceling hurdle rates or management fees, as you can imagine. I would have to actually sit back and reflect on that one probably over a weekend to see like what that would look like and how we could make it happen naturally. But I think for us, like, we're always open to alternative structures. You know, I think that the reality is in order to make disruption happen, everybody has to take necessary steps or step backs. I would say, like, within our own fund, the management fees are manageable, so to speak, but we also have to make sure that organizations are incentivized to work and produce. So that's the challenge there.
Thanks, Jennifer. And just a quick point on my end, and Ashley raised it earlier about the work they're doing at the fund. But I think it's critical that a lot of these vehicles that are out there need to, from the outset, communicate to the LPs that is the fund kind of model actually working in terms of the economics they're presenting. You know, a critical thing that we keep hearing is that a lot of these enterprises still need a lot of handholding. So is that embedded within, you know, whether it's the overall fund cost? Are they able to allocate resources to this, and are they being held accountable for it? You know, going in from day one and just telling a company that I'm going to give you 5 million and expect, you know, 2x in 5 years, that's not sufficient. There needs to be a clear alignment on who's going to do what to achieve that, and everyone needs to be held accountable for that. You know, not in 5 years that I have a put option to the sponsor, and if you don't do it, I sell your business. But actually that we put a plan, you know, 100-day plan from day one. We're actually being measured against these metrics by our LPs, and we're working towards that. I think also just, you know, secondly is not necessarily just taking a cut and paste model, you know, as Frank said. You know, if it's a Western private equity model, does it work in certain markets that we operate in, and how can it be tweaked effectively to achieve the returns that everyone is trying to look for?
Well,
Thank you very much for that, Paul.
Jennifer,
very briefly, Frank, because I would like to go to Adrian, who challenged us earlier in the beginning to see whether we have answered his question. So Frank, short intervention, please.
No, just I wanted to add one point to Paul's intervention is that hand-holding. Again, I believe that is an area of partnership, because many funds think that they can do the hand-holding, but they can't. They're just full of bankers who don't necessarily know anything about agribusiness. So they're also, in their mindset, they should have a greater preparedness for being handheld by external expertise, external non-executive directors and experts or organizations, and recognize that.
Thank you so much. So Adrian, I would like to go back to you because you in the beginning actually posed some challenging questions to us in terms of thinking out of the box and all of the different things that we would like to achieve. What would be your reflection on the discussion that we have so far? And what is it that you're taking away back to the field as you're working on the Farm to Market Alliance?
Thank you very much, Jennifer. A couple of things that were mentioned. Fintechs, of course, very important because we work with a couple of fintechs, and while it's going slow to progress, there is enormous potential to cut costs, operational costs, but also, just to give you an example, one of the fintechs we're working with, they're providing through their system 1% for the farmers in the small agribusinesses per month. So that's the normal banks can't even touch that, because if you look at the cost for a farmer and agribusinesses, you reach at 20% minimum. So we see there is an enormous potential. So the fintechs, I'm happy, Ashley, that you mentioned that. It's a game changer, although I see that investment in those fintechs, the promising and the fintechs that have already track record is not as much as we would like to see. Yeah, on the whole investment climate, it is, okay, there is no agriculture economy in the world, as far as I know, that is pure market-based. Not in Kenya, not in the European Union, not in America, not in India, not in China, not in Turkey, maybe in Uganda, actually. Yeah, but most agriculture economies, there is a private sector part, always. Food is just too important to leave it just to the market. So if you look at blended finance, it's that if you have your finance part for the commercial sectors in the value chain, there needs to be a grant part, because that's the strategic investment. Especially, we're not talking about flowers and avocados. That's easy, Frank. That's why flowers work very well. Avocado works very well because it's easy. The food commodity is much more difficult. So if we really want to be innovative and pool more money and fintech, etc., there needs to be a public part, because that's that strategic investment that you need to do in those value chain. You might call it technical assistance, or maybe risk management fund from the governments, etc. But that blended finance, I think that's very important, that was mentioned, but I don't see that enough in actual business plans. I see the public side comes up with the proposals or business plans. Then you see the private sector, they have business plans, and they say they will work together. They said, why? I have not seen, and maybe they're there, I have not seen of hybrid business plans that is done together by a grant part that comes mainly from the public side and a private side that needs to attract commercial money. And I'm talking with some of investing brokers, but also big investment pension funds, just to have their ideas. And they say, okay, maybe that's something to consider. And then the last thing, I think, I don't know who, Ashley, maybe you said it about does scale matters. Not at all, because if you look, I come from the Netherlands. If you have a farm that is 20 hectares, you're a very, very big boy. In the Netherlands, we don't have a big scale farms, yet we are one of the largest producers of agriculture commodities in the world. So I see that like almost quoting Mr. Mao, let 1 million farms bloom in Africa. I think if we can help them to do better, environmental more sound, better practices, that millions of small farms can bloom and can do much, much better, and then scale doesn't matter. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Adrian. And thank you for bringing the farmers back to the heart of the discussion. We have 5 minutes remaining, and I really would like to go back to some of our speakers who in the beginning helped to set the scene and get the reflection. Honorable Vice Minister, welcome back to the conversation. Can I just have your 1 minute reflection on what you've heard? And I think maybe the #1 takeaway for you as a government from this discussion.
Thank you very much. What I would say is for the challenge is very huge, very big. And summarizing, I would say that each country, and even within each country, each region should have its own balanced domestic food system. What I say when I speak about balanced food system, I'm speaking about the local markets, regional markets, international markets, even global markets, how this country can be a good player in this market, but not distorting its own food system within the country. This is because each country has its biodiversity, have its diversity in terms of food habits, what people eat there. Maybe it's a coastal country, they have different food resources to get food.
Yeah.
If it's in a littoral, they have fish.
Yeah.
Fishing communities. If it's in the interior, they don't have enough fish, and in some regions they are used to eat more maize or cassava or more cassava or other crop. So all these conditions are very determinant to each country to get its food system and also know how to get how can farmers can get good markets in order to develop their value chains. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Vice Minister. I'm just quickly checking, Donald Brown, do you still have 1 minute, just a few seconds to share with us your reflections on this conversation?
Thank you, Jennifer, and thanks for everyone. I thought it was one of the best conversations we've had for a while. So my 1 or 2 takeaways is, I think, going a bit back to what Frank said, you know, I don't see this as an either or. To me, it's an and. There's space for everyone in this system, and the 2-person small fledgling agribusiness in the back end of Beyond in Kenya could be your next regional company of the future. The question for me is about how do you identify and grow and accompany them on that journey. And so I go back to this whole thing that, you know, investment ready for me is investment ready to start that journey as much as to scale it up. So, you know, we need the range of financial instruments. We talked a bit about blended finance, which I think is really important, particularly in that, and a whole range of ways of doing that. And I think the main thing for me on blended finance is you need a clear vision of where you're trying to get to. You need to be very clear about the transition to commercial and as it goes, and to wean people off. And it's for specific types of investments and costs. You know, it's not a one size fits all. You know, in EFAB, we've just actually set up a unit just to focus on blended finance and to see how we can basically de-risk commercial investments in our market segment. And, you know, I think there's room for everyone, but really, really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Donald. And Mrs. Moholo, may I give you the honor to actually have your reflections so I can make closing remarks. Thank you.
In Botswana, you may know that contribution to GDP from agriculture is a pittance. And I think it's just as well, you mentioned that when you have a disaster such as COVID, the virus, it's sometimes you have to look to see what else you can hold on to when there are difficulties. If you look to see what agriculture actually does, I did mention earlier in my submission that, you know, it's the engine of economic growth. And if it does that, it goes without saying that almost everything that is needed to develop a country or to make a contribution to the livelihoods of the inhabitants of any country, engine has to be number one thing that you think about, because it brings food. It also provides finances that are responsible for building infrastructure, just to mention a few. So we are very serious in Botswana now because we could not cross the border to go to South Africa to go and buy meal. Yeah, we have been able to see people actually getting bags of meal from their own fields. So I have no doubt in my mind that in the next couple of years, there will be not only sufficient food to feed the nation, the nationals of Botswana, there will be something that we can export so that we can compete with the rest of the world and get it exactly what it is that agriculture can do. I have to end my submission by saying that it's important, and I mentioned this in my earlier remark, that it's about time that women are given the right space in ensuring that contribution to agriculture grows. And you can only do so if you give them sufficient land. As the gentleman who spoke earlier says, it doesn't have to be a big piece of land for you to be able to benefit from. You can get it from just something that you have at the back of your house. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Maholo. I think rightfully so. Women were brought in the last minutes of this session, and I would like to actually thank my entire panel for a very engaging and interesting discussion. There were really a couple of very interesting takeaways. I think one was brought forward by you, Mrs. Maholo, in terms of it's not just about making companies investment ready, it's how do we make the entire industry profitable. Thank you to the panel for bringing out of the box thinking and a couple of challenging questions to this debate. We will definitely incorporate them in the deal room next year as we're designing that. I would like to close by saying, let's continue to be innovative also in the context of COVID. We have a few years and still major challenges and ambitions in terms of ensuring end zero hunger and building $1 trillion agribusiness sector here in Africa. So thank you very much and have a nice day.